everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I'm your host, Taylor Rockwell. No Daryl Grove with me. He should be back in studio tomorrow. But instead, I'm going to be talking about some slightly difficult topics with Mr. Leander Schaerlaeckens of Yahoo Sports, also a lecturer at Marist College. We're going to be getting into Sergino Dest. There was some news today about his sort of decision to play for the Netherlands or the United States. It's not bleak, don't worry, U.S. fans, but it's not like the best news either. It's somewhere in between. But we get into that and kind of what may influence his decision. Then we kind of focus primarily on an article Leander recently wrote for Yahoo about sort of racism in Serie A, why there seem to be so many more instances of it this season, and why it sort of hasn't been dealt with, the sort of logic behind the failure to deal with it, and how it allows Italian officials to continue to not deal with it. And we close out by talking about sports journalism in the modern era. So again, maybe those aren't the most lighthearted of topics, but I would say they are the most useful and necessary topics to be discussed. And Leander does so with aplomb. I'm not sure what that word means, but I'm pretty sure it means with grace and skill, and that's what he used. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to me asking questions to Leander Schaerlaeckens of Yahoo Sports. Joining me on the other end of the line, I've got Leander Schaerlaeckens of Yahoo Sports and a lecturer at Marist College. Leander, thank you for taking the time to chat today. And did I get that name roughly right, to the pronunciation thereof?
You got it magnificently right.
All right.
I'm very glad to make my debut appearance.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's been so long, because I think we first met way back when Charlie Davies was playing for DC United and you were writing features about him. But that was very brief. That was when I think we were only one day a week and still on the radio here in Richmond. Different times, but we've still got familiar things to talk about with potential Americans abroad and the U.S. national team, but then also some more pressing issues from today, like racism in Italy. So we've got some big topics to discuss. But I did want to start a little bit with your background, because your Marist College bio explains that Leander was born in the Netherlands, grew up in Belgium, went to college in London, attended graduate school in Washington, D.C. I'm going to say that puts you in a fairly solid position to discuss Sergino Dest. You tweeted out a translation of some comments made by him earlier today. It sounds like maybe he hasn't actually made up his decision.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm reading it. I mean, honestly, I tweeted sort of through my thoughts a few days ago as well. You know, all things being equal, if he's sort of on the fence, my inclination was that he would choose for the Netherlands purely for kind of logistical reasons, if all else is equal to him. Because if you kind of look at the different variables, the Dutch have missed 2 out of the last 5 World Cups, if I'm getting my math right. The U.S. has missed 1. Obviously, neither one of them is likely to miss a ton of World Cups, so that's kind of the same. The Dutch are obviously a bit more competitive, but at the same time, there's more competition for that spot, right? That being said, the right back spot for the Netherlands right now is actually pretty thin. There are a few guys that you thought were going to be around for a long time and kind of manning that spot, but at the same time, nobody's really made it theirs. I mean, Gregory van der Wiel's career just kind of disintegrated much earlier than anybody expected. Joel Veldman plays right back, but he's not a real right back. He's a center back. Dumfries and Hateboer, neither of them have really made that spot theirs, even though they're both quite talented. Kenny Tete is riding the bench at Lyon. So, suddenly when it seemed like there were 4 or 5 guys ahead of him, maybe it might just be that there's nobody ahead of him, or that he's at the very least going to be platooning in that spot. So I don't imagine that he expected to have opportunities to play for both nations as an 18-year-old. And so that's possibly, without trying to read an 18-year-old's mind, created a bit of a quandary for him. So unless he feels a really strong pull between the 2 programs, it was my inclination that he'd be more predisposed to the Netherlands because he grew up there, because he speaks the language better, to be honest with you. And because the logistical piece to this, you can't really underestimate. I mean, we saw that with Timmy Chandler, right? Where it's a really big ask on a player to come over 6 times a year for a camp, for a game here, to go down to Costa Rica and play a game, and then fly right back and be with your club. Like, it adds a significant strain to your season that he can avoid by staying with the Netherlands. So that's why I thought, if if he's 50-50 right now, I'm guessing he'll go with the Netherlands. But it really does sound from this interview that he gave to the Dutch version of Fox Sports that he just doesn't know yet, that he said he had invitations from both. He said he turned both of them down. He's had conversations with Ronald Koeman, or at least one of them. He's talked to Greg Berhalter, obviously, and he just hasn't figured it out yet. So maybe it's a toss-up. Who knows?
And then, there were tweets today. Roger Gonzalez tweeted out that an Ajax teammate of Dest that isn't Dutch, got that one out. He's said that maybe he's favoring the U.S. national team over the Dutch national team, with his concern being playing time. But it does feel like that's the thing where we're just going to keep getting different stories and different kind of clickbaity headlines. Would you advise people who are kind of nervous about Sergino Dest to sort of avoid reading too much into it until we have actual news? Or do you think there's always going to be leaks, there's always going to be news, and maybe some of it is more genuine than others?
Yeah, all of those, all of the above. I really genuinely have the sense, and I got that sense when I asked him in person a few weeks ago when he was in for the U.S. Mexico game, that he just hasn't made up his mind yet.
Yeah.
I mean, again, he's 18 years old, and he's got to make this decision that if his career pans out the way that he and everybody hopes it will, that's a decision he's going to have to live with for, a decade and a half. So he doesn't want to get it wrong. And I genuinely got the sense that he just is still working through his options and is still trying to, work out the pros and cons of each of them. So, what the Netherlands obviously is a bit more prestigious as a program, perhaps, or at least a little bit more successful historically, but it's going to be more competitive. The U.S. he's played with, he's been to 2 Youth World Cups with the U.S., so that's kind of the program that nurtured him and that brought him along, and that, maybe he didn't expect that he would really have the choice, but now he does. So I really wouldn't read anything into any of this stuff and just kind of let it play out, because we'll know soon enough. He figured he had to make a decision in the next month, so probably for the November camps. Until it's clear in his mind, there's really no sense in us trying to figure it out without being privy to that internal dialogue that he's having.
So that is an excellent answer. I heard everything you said. I agree with everything you said. I'm still going to ask one more question about it, though. As you said, you've interacted with him. I have not. I've never met him. This is probably going to sound like a stupid question. I apologize in advance. But, does he strike you as a youngster who is sort of more interested in the United States, having grown up in the Netherlands? Because it does feel like that is a very big factor for a lot of dual nationals in choosing to represent the United States, is sort of what the United States was for them growing up, and sort of it being a center of culture in a lot of ways, and pop culture at that. Does he seem like a person who's kind of interested in those things, or does he seem, from your interactions with him, like a kind of Dutch kid who grew up in the Netherlands?
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because when you talk to someone in the mixed zone, you get 4 minutes with them.
Very true.
But
he didn't espouse all of his cultural philosophy in those 4 minutes?
Well, you're right in that for a lot of national teamers, Jermaine Jones, Terrence Boyd in particular, the American piece of their heritage was really important to them, and something that was kind of closed off to them growing up in Europe with a father who maybe wasn't around, or who maybe they didn't have the best relationship with. And so then it becomes kind of a psychological matter as well. I don't know if that's true for Sergino. I suspect that it's not, to be honest with you. But he does seem to have a really good head on his shoulders. He seems super mature and super thoughtful, again, for an 18-year-old. And in my other job as a college teacher, I deal with a lot of young men his age. And he really did struck me as being very composed and very level-headed. What I will say is that, his English, while good and perfectly passable, it's not as good as some of the other dual nationals that we've had. So maybe if we really want to get into the nitty gritty and try to read meaning into small things, maybe that's a suggestion that his American sort of sense of identity isn't as strong as it has been in some others, like Jermaine Jones, who was perfectly fluent the day he arrived in the program. That's maybe less true for Sergino. So in that sense, he very much is a Dutch kid who also happens to have come up through the American youth national team program.
I don't know how else to ask this aside from because I know you are the objective journalist, but you are also an Ajax fan from what I understand. Do you have any vested interest in this? Do you like does it impact your rooting for him and Ajax if he's playing for the U.S. national team or playing for the Netherlands?
We're delving deep into the burrows of my psyche now. I'd really not considered that, to be honest. And the thing about being an Ajax fan is that if you know that he's really good, he's going to be gone in 2 years anyway.
Good point.
So what does it matter at that point? But I wouldn't mind seeing him on the U.S. national team. I think it could be fun. I think he's a player that fits what Greg Berhalter's trying to do really, really well. Something interesting that he told me is that Dest actually has a more attacking role within the U.S. national team system than he does within Ajax, which I thought was sort of funny because the U.S. obviously has this reputation of being more of historically a gritty bunker and counter type team, whereas Ajax plays this expansive soccer. So I think he's a really good fit. I think it's sort of magical that he can play right back and left back, and you kind of, if he does choose the U.S., you wish you could clone him and play him on both sides. But he's such an obvious fit for either program that's just sort of one more complicating factor.
Hey folks, this is Taylor jumping into the middle of a fairly serious interview with Leander Schaerlaeckens to talk about a slightly less serious but still important topic, which is today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is the number one meal kit delivery service in the U.S. You can get easy, seasonal recipes and pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your door. All you have to do is cook and enjoy. HelloFresh also makes cooking delicious meals at home a reality, regardless of your comfort in the kitchen. And as I kind of indicated on the show the other day, it also makes it easier for me to never go outside, which I'm not necessarily sure is a good thing, because when Daryl's out of town, I can record remotely, which means I could be at home, which means I could just have HelloFresh shipped right to my door, and then I really never have to leave the physical environs of my home, which probably isn't the best thing. Socializing is useful, and being around other humans equally useful. But if you are cooking by yourself, or maybe you're making it into a dinner date or something like that, HelloFresh provides step-by-step recipes to pre-measured ingredients, so you'll have everything you need to get a wow-worthy dinner on the table in just about 30 minutes. So you can say goodbye to endless grocery store trips and take out food that is maybe never as fulfilling, and you kind of never feel as good as if you'd made it yourself. I believe it was Hannibal Lecter from the Hannibal Lecter TV show who said, "Why pay for something that I know I can make better myself?" HelloFresh does not offer you maybe the options that Hannibal would enjoy, but they do have something for pretty much everyone else. They've got family recipes, calorie smart and vegetarian options, a fun menu series like Hall of Fame and craft burgers. So everything you need to make delicious home-cooked recipes, and you can do so at a discount because they're also offering you $80 off your first month of HelloFresh. So you go to HelloFresh.com/TSS80 and enter the code TSS80 at checkout. One more time, to break out of your dinner rut with HelloFresh's 20-plus seasonal chef-curated recipes each week, and to get $80 off your first month of HelloFresh, you go to HelloFresh.com/TSS80 and enter TSS80 at checkout. Thank you very, very much to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to my conversation with Leander Schaerlaeckens of Yahoo Sports. Well, you've made me entirely too optimistic now with the idea of cloning him and playing him in both spots. So I'm going to remove that optimism, instead move to a more serious, definitely more of a downbeat topic, because you wrote a great piece for Yahoo about these sort of recent instances of racism in Serie A and how kind of consistent they have been this season. To an outsider, which is me, it does seem like there seem to be more racist incidents in Serie A and Italian national team matches than in any other league or country, at least in Western Europe. Do you feel like that is the case, or is it maybe just that they seem to have a greatest number of incidents that go unpunished?
So that's an interesting question. I do think there's a stronger racism problem there than you see in other leagues, and it seems largely to be born of ignorance. And I don't want to cast aspersions on Italy as a nation or all fan bases and all teams. But you have sort of a sense there that when you see the explanations from the people that are involved, right? When you have the Inter Milan fans telling their own player, Romelu Lukaku, what you experienced, the monkey noises, was not actually racism. We're sorry if you feel that was racism, but that's really not what happened. The exact quote from their statement is, "You have to understand that Italy is not like many other North European countries where racism is a real problem." And then they sort of said, we just do that to put off the other player. So it seems like they don't understand the difference entirely between being racist and committing racist acts. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of echoed even when the team president said that they didn't mean anything by it. And then you see when there were more recent incidents, like the Verona fans who said, these are just cliches and old labels, when Frank Kessie of AC Milan was racially abused. And then you had it again at the Atalanta-Fiorentina game when Dalbert, who's a Fiorentina defender from Brazil, actually signaled to the referee that he'd been racially abused, and they stopped the game for a little bit. When both managers of both the teams said, no, actually, that really wasn't racism. It was just insults, right? And Vincenzo Montella, the Fiorentina manager, said, I'm from Naples. I get insulted all the time. I don't think it's racist. It's just part of soccer. And so then you get into kind of murkier territory where there is that tradition almost in Italian soccer of kind of going after not just the other team's players, but where they're from, right? And Napoli famously is the Italian city and the Italian club that's looked down on by the entire nation. And so to Montella's mind, being insulted and being racially abused is the same thing. And that seems to be the thing that gets conflated, where they don't really see a difference between just kind of, getting on another team's players, getting sort of personal to kind of put them off, and being racist. And until that distinction is made, they're going to have a hard time rooting this out because they don't seem to think this is a problem.
So, maybe this exists everywhere and I just don't realize it. But to me, that distinction is very unique to Italy. The idea of no, we're just kind of talking. And I know that gets thrown around as it's locker room talk or whatever. But right. It being a sort of system-wide, no, this is just how it is. We don't have that problem. Northern Europe does. Do you get an idea as to why that seems like such a pervasive idea in Italy? Is it just that that's how it's always been?
I don't know that it's entirely Italian, right? Because you saw it at Manchester City when they had the incident where Bernardo Silva tweeted a plainly racist image at his teammate Benjamin Mendy, and Mendy thought it was fine, and Pep Guardiola thought it was fine, and they said these are just two friends having a laugh. Can't two friends make a joke between them? To which you say, well, no, actually, it wasn't a joke between them. It was on Twitter. Everybody saw it. And that kind of ignorance about a joke or something not being meant with racist intentions, automatically not being racist, that ignorance is what has to be addressed. And that maybe seems to be stronger in Italy, where they do have that culture of going after your opponents in the most vicious way possible. That I think is the battleground where this has to be fought out, where you have to kind of go to these fans and say, look, that's not okay. Even if you're not a racist in sort of an ideological way, what you're doing is racist, and that's sort of where we draw the line. But that's going to be really hard to do when managers and team presidents and the fan groups, and from the looks of it, also the Italian Federation that keeps washing its hands clean of this and not really giving out real punishments, don't sort of appreciate the difference.
Do you get the idea that that's like managers and people in executives, people in charge of the league? Is that them sort of actually saying no, this behavior's fine, we're just kind of talking trash, it's not racism, or do you feel like maybe it's just not wanting to deal with it because of such a how big the issue is going to be? I think it was the Verona owner or manager came out and said how dare you call the city of Verona racist? And it was well, that wasn't the allegation. The allegation was that some of your fans are racist, and I can't tell if that's a intentional move to sort of basically make it a larger issue and then be it isn't a larger issue, or if it is actually them sort of willingly sidestepping a problem because they don't really want to have to deal with it.
I think there's two pieces to it. One is the tribalism and just the raw sort of atavistic adversarialism that you have within soccer, where anytime you're accused of something, it must mean that they hate your team and they're not being fair and they're trying to smear you. And it's that whole sort of fake news culture that's developed within soccer, where anything that's said about your team that's not flattering must be coming from a sort of evil place, right? So that's one part of it. I think the other is coming to grips with your own biases and with your own flaws, and then addressing a problem that is so huge and sort of acknowledging that as a community you've been wrong about this, and you've been wrong about it for a long time, and in a really big way. It takes a lot to sort of reckon with that, and I think it's a lot easier to just explain it away. I mean, it's like the chant that the Mexican national team fans do, right? That we won't say out loud, but that starts with a P. You know, just kind of addressing that issue first requires a recognition of wrongdoing in yourself, and then secondly, you have to, root out something that's so deeply entrenched in your supporter culture, and that's such a big part of it. And I think just the realization of it, and B, trying to figure out how to actually change it is so daunting that that's just a lot easier to pretend that, oh, it's not a big deal, there isn't a problem here, move along.
I'm asking you a lot of very big questions, and I appreciate how quickly you're able to answer them. This one, again, kind of big. Like, what do you think progress then looks like? Because it doesn't seem like an issue that just kind of gets resolved overnight and suddenly all of these things stop. But it also seems like that is the way it should go. So, like, I struggle to see, like, how do you think we can gauge, like, if things are being properly addressed, if things are calming down? Is it just that we hear about them less, or is it that things are, like, teams are actually being punished and held accountable for their fans?
I think that's the big part of it, accountability. I think the way to solve this is you have to start within the sport and with those players and with those managers that think this is fine, and sort of have an old-fashioned HR sit down and say, look, we're going to need to do some sensitivity training here, or whatever you want to call it, and kind of these are all the ways in which you're behaving that are not acceptable, and start with developing that understanding within the sport, because if it comes from the outside, if it comes from the press, if it comes from, talking heads on TV, if it comes from a federation or league kind of imposing this, teams will always sort of put their back up and say, oh, you're just targeting us, you're just picking on us. The understanding has to come from within the clubs so that it doesn't seem like they're being attacked from the outside, which is always going to be sort of the reaction that they default to. And then from there, once you sort of develop that, you need to start punishing it in real ways, right? Docking teams points, or making them play in front of empty stadiums, or there's different things you can do rather than having these sad little fines or doing nothing at all. And then from there, you can, I think, start to measure these things by how many incidents persist.
Do you think one other, like, kind of reaction to this, or way that maybe it gets resolved, is if players stop wanting to play there? Because I think it was Demba Ba, tweeted out, like, this is why I didn't want to play in Italy, in response to the Inter fans defending Cagliari in the face of Lukaku. And it did make me wonder, because it's not just, like, we do talk a lot about black players, but I read an article where they were saying there was, like, a 14-year-old, I think it was, like, half Ecuadorian kid who's a goalkeeper who was getting, like, racist abuse. And it does seem like it's regardless of skin color, there's a lot of racism issues. And I do wonder if players stop playing there, does that sort of force the hands of these owners and managers?
I wish it would, but I don't think it will. I mean, for years and years and years, nobody of color wanted to play for Lazio because they knew that they were going to be abused by their own fans. And that was true at Zenit St. Petersburg as well, when they got Axel Witsel and Hulk. And their fans just sort of revolted against having non-white players. And, you have seen players refuse to suit up for certain teams, and it's not really made a difference. Mm-hmm. Because I think, if anything, it sort of plays into the hands of the actual racists within that fan base that want to see all white teams. And it makes it easier for them to weaponize their racism against other teams when they themselves are purely white, right? It just creates a bigger color contrast, so to speak. So I don't think that works. I really think you have to begin a pressure campaign within these teams.
All right. Well, it sounds like there will be a lot more work to be done, a lot more coverage of that work. So I look forward to talking to you about that in the future, hopefully with like a slightly better like way of discussing it. But until then, I want to talk to you about one more slightly depressing thing. Not you as a presenter, but you are a lecturer at Marist College. Again, reading the bio, you're teaching sports reporting, sport culture and communication, issues in sports media. That is obviously very relevant in the modern era. I think as we're recording this today, Sports Illustrated announced there's going to be layoffs. How do you sort of teach, or like what is the advice you give to your students in the modern age of like pivoting to video, increasing advertisements? Like how much has your sort of curriculum changed from what it would have been 10 or 15 years ago?
It's funny you should say that because we're actually in the process of completely modernizing our curriculum. But you know, what I tell my students is, and their parents who really want to know, is, you know, there is as much sports media being made as ever. There is as much sports TV, as much sports social content, as much video content, as much sports writing as there's ever been. It's just that a lot of the jobs are in different places than they used to be, and you have to know where to look for them. And a lot of those jobs are not traditional journalism in the sense that, you know, you might be working for a team or for a league that kind of covers itself, but you're still kind of doing the core functions of a journalist and of a sports writer. And those journalists, whether in traditional media or kind of different forms of it, are sort of asked to do more and more different things. So we really kind of harp on them knowing how to write, knowing how to shoot, knowing how to run social accounts, knowing how to sort of read the metrics of social engagement, that kind of thing. I think the industry is robust. It's just evolving, and you have to kind of know how to follow along with that.
And in terms of Marist alumni that you're most proud of, is it more Bill O'Reilly or more Rick Smits?
Wow. Yeah, I'm going to be on Team Smits there.
That seems like a good team to be on. Well, Leander, I really appreciate it. If people want to read more from you, hear more from you, how can they do so?
I'm at Yahoo Sports, where I write 3 soccer columns a week, and they can follow on Twitter at Leander Alphabet.
All right, and I will provide a link to the article you wrote about racism in Serie A in today's show notes. But I wanted to say one more time, thank you very much for talking about not necessarily the most fun topics, but doing so in a very informative and useful way. Thank you very much for that.
It was my pleasure.